What is underrated? That is a question I had to sit down and ask myself before making this video. For you see, today, I wanted to discuss what I thought would be the top 10 most underrated Dark-type Pokemon. You know, given that Dark types are kind of my thing and all. But I've been trying to really ask myself what the true definition of underrated means. Anyone can say anything is underrated, right? So I've decided that the Pokemon I do for this top 10 are gonna meet at minimum one of these criteria. Number 1, this Pokemon isn't seen in a competitive match very much. Either there are more popular options, or the Pokemon just hasn't found its niche yet, assuming it could have one at all. 2, this Pokemon does not have as much of a following as other Dark types, like Tyranitar or Darkrai. They aren't as popular, even though they probably could be if people realized their merits. 3, because all lists are subject and come down to personal opinions, they have to be Pokemon I deem to, simply put, just don't see at all. Not in competition, not as design, not even in casual Pokemon chat. People simply just don't talk about it enough. So, with these criteria fulfilled, let's begin our list of what I believe to be the top 10 most underrated Dark-type Pokemon. If you guys want to see more of a series like this, let me know what typing you want to see next. The comment with the most upvotes will be the one we cover next time. With that though, let's begin. Okay, so this one is going to feel very strange, but I argue that this Pokemon is pretty underrated for a Pokemon that just came out. It is always compared to what came before it, and I think that doesn't do it much justice. I see nothing but people talking down on Iron Jugulus. No one uses Iron Jugulus from what I can tell, or at the very least, it's very rare. Despite being one of the new Paradox Pokemon introduced. I guess it makes sense. Less base stat total than Hydreigon, is weaker, and doesn't have Draco Meteor. Hurricane is pretty bad about actually landing, and he doesn't have the cool Dragon typing. But for what it's worth, Iron Jugulus having higher speed, a solid move pull, and the ability Quark Drive is nothing to scoff at. If you want my opinion, this Pokemon is actually not bad on its own merit. The only issue is people will always continue to compare it to Hydreigon, which, yeah, it's hard not to when that's what it is at the end of the day. Well, actually, it's the product of a Hydreigon that fell in love with a robot. Originally, I had placed this Pokemon higher on the list, but as I thought about it, this Pokemon isn't too underrated. While it isn't talked about nowadays, back in the days of Pursuit, this Pokemon was a lower tier hero. Enter Skuntank. This thing back in its heyday of before Generation 8 was really good in the lower tiers of Smogon. So among competitive singles players who dabbled in NU and RU, Skuntank is actually remembered fondly. So why do I see him as underrated? Because all he's known for is his lower tier niche. Yeah, he's on Jupiter's team, and that's awesome, but no one really seems to actually care about this guy. I've never seen anyone actually talk about Skuntank. It's a cool dark poison type, one of the first of its kind alongside Drapion. And I don't know, a giant skunk that learns Flamethrower and Fire Blast is pretty cool in my eyes. Next up, we have a Pokemon introduced in Sword and Shield that I don't see anybody ever talk about. Where on earth is Stevel? No one talks about the Fox Thief, and I guess I kinda get it. Not the best stats, not the best coverage, no competitive superstar by any means, and I'm not gonna hype up what isn't there. But I honestly don't see why no one talks about its design. It's a smug fox in a masquerade mask that gives you the smug look when it robs you blind. Also, if you read the Pokedex, you see that it marks its target with a scent and steals when it least expects it, which is cool. But for me, what sells it? Its natural enemy is one of the goodest boys in Pokemon, Boltund. Okay, so I don't see enough Pangoro. Yeah, it unfortunately doesn't have the best stats and all that, and sadly it has a 4 times weakness to the best type in the game, while being introduced the exact same generation as that type. But I would call that more of a victim of bad luck. But can you unironically look at Pangoro and tell me that this Yakuza Panda isn't a cool design? Sure, competitively there are better options, but not everything is about comp. I just wish we saw more of this guy in, well, anything really. But hey, we have Parting Shot, which is a pretty good move, and its abilities aren't bad. Iron Fist is great for the setup variants of Pangoro that want to use Bulk Up or Sword Stance to beef up their power. Plus Drain Punch for recovery and damage, Bullet Punch for priority and to kill fairies, and Knock Off for stab. Or you can potentially mix in some elemental punches too. Mold Breaker ignoring abilities lets you get cheeky against Pokemon that are reliant on their abilities. And Scrappy is good on choice sets because you can throw out your powerful fighting moves without worrying about a ghost type trying to force you out once you've locked yourself into close combat. There's hope and a prayer for him. He's just hard to make the best use of him with some of those rather mediocre stats. Okay, so you want my opinion? Hot take, but Morpeko is a twinge more underrated than Pangoro. Let me explain. You see, Morpeko is going to suffer from something that we get in every new Pokemon game, the Pikachu clone. Pikachu, Pikablu, Plusle, Minun, Pachirisu, Emolga, Dedenne, Togedemaru, and then in Gen 8, Morpeko. Morpeko also felt pretty pushed, given that it's arguably Marnie's most recognizable Pokemon. Yet, no one really mentions it much, despite how much Game Freak pushed us to want to like it. It has a cool gimmick, and it's really cute. Yet, no one seems to remember it for some reason. Am I just coping, or is something wrong? I feel like this little rat needs more recognition. Okay, so this is one of those Pokemon where I see people actually talk about it and actually like it. But it's here on this list because it's not underrated in terms of a fan base as much as it is underrated competitively. This is a Pokemon that I fully believe could and should at least be played around with a little more on Smogon Ladder and in tournaments. So let me talk about Shiftry. And let's go over the pros and cons real quick about this Pokemon. The cons. 1, it's frail. 2, has a lot of weaknesses. 3, very little coverage. The pros. 1, it hits really hard. 2, access to Sucker Punch. 3, Chlorophyll for Sun teams. And 4, Knock Off and Solar Blade. Despite being in the same speed tier as Venusaur and having just as good offenses, its less than ideal coverage and lack of defensive profile make Venusaur much better. But Sucker Punch and Stab Knockoff honestly could be experimented with more on Sun teams, and I wish people would try to give it a fair shot. Spiritomb is a Pokemon that I think is bound to be considered underrated. And the reason I say that is, admittedly, for an oddly specific reason. Getting one is hard. And when I say it's hard, I mean that in every Pokemon game where Spiritomb is available, they make it a pain in the neck to get. Scarlet and Violet gave it the easiest treatment, because it's a rare spawn on Glaciado Mountain. And Spiritomb is a Pokemon I don't see much of on the idea that not only has it been getting rather painful, but also because this Pokemon is past its prime competitively due to power creep. Now, with that said, why do I think it should be given more respect than I think it has? Well, firstly, this Pokemon isn't inherently bad in a fight, with a few solid sets it can run and decent enough defenses. Ghost Dark is a really sick typing to have, only being weak to Fairy, and the lore behind this thing is sick. 108 souls that committed misdeeds as one Pokemon found themselves bound to an odd keystone by a literal magical spell. Spiritomb confirms actual, just straight up magic in the Pokemon world, and not just, oh, a legendary did it. Although, it makes me wonder, did the Travel who cast this spell go and find every single Spiritomb and bring them into an odd keystone? Or did all the other Spiritombs just like the cut of the original ones jib? I want to talk about Cacturne. Cacnea got a role in the anime, being James's partner for quite some time. But Cacturne itself? I don't see it really getting much attention. Yeah, back in Gens 3 and 4, people used Substitute plus Sandville Cacturne to take advantage of the new evasion in sand. But that was more to prove a point rather than because they thought Cacturne was good. And while it isn't good in a fight by any means due to fertility and low speed, I just think he's a neat Pokemon. And I don't mean that too much for competitive standards, because he's not too good there. I just mean as a design and as a Pokemon itself. The idea of these things being both scarecrows and cactus, and the fact that they're incredibly dangerous creatures, kind of sells them to me. I know I don't want to be in a desert at night, or at all. Otherwise, a group of these guys is the last thing I'm gonna see. Okay, so admittedly, this is biased. This is extreme bias on my end. But I think people just actually, unironically, don't use Malamar enough. It has a solid move pool, it has usable, albeit mediocre stats, and only 2 weaknesses in the entire game, being Bug, which it's 4 times weak to, and Fairy. But why I think it's underrated is because unlike most of this list, where I think they're underrated in one specific area, whether or not it be comp or just as a design, I think that Malamar is overall good in every feasible regard. Why I deem him as underrated is because he is being literally underrated. He's got contrary superpower, he's got knockoff, he's got a solid typing, he's got a prankster immunity, he's got average stats, so he's only gonna be really good in lower tiers. But he's still usable. His shield Pokedex entry is literally this. It's said that Malamar's hypnotic powers played a role in certain history-changing events. Yeah, that's right. I bet you didn't know that Malamar simply existing has changed the course of history itself. This thing is a complete menace, and yet I never see anybody discussing it. Because, sadly, for Malamar, there are some better options, and some flashier designs. Me, personally, he could probably be lower on this list, but I think he deserves the number 2 spot on the idea that he's a good Pokemon that is actually just looked over. So rather than telling you honorable mentions, I'm going to tell you Pokemon that aren't underrated dark types. No, in fact, these are perfectly rated in my eyes. They're either bad, and most people I've seen talking about them agree, or they're just as good as everyone says they are. Alolan Raticate, Alolan Persian, Mightyena, actually, that's it. That's what comes to the top of my head. Okay, so maybe I'm just seeing this whole thing wrong, but who actually remembered that Guzzlord existed before I made this video? Maybe my lens is skewed, but with Pheromosa, Naganadel, Kartana, Xurkitree, and Ultra Beasts that people tend to actually use in battle existing, it's hard for me to remember him in comparison to the rest of the gang. In lore, he's basically described as a ravenous world eater, which I think is pretty sick, all things considered. But in practice, using him is pretty tedious. He's got good HP, but that low speed and those low defenses hinders him greatly, along with having the common weaknesses of fighting, fairy, and dragon, alongside being weak to U-turn to really rub salt in the wound. And offensively, he isn't too spectacular either. Now, why do I think he's underrated? Because despite all his issues, he's objectively not bad. He's not great in comparison to other Ultra Beasts, but I think this Pokemon can definitely find its own niche if people are willing to experiment enough. It's got a very solid move pool with Knockoff, Stone Edge, Sludge Wave / Sludge Bomb, or Belch with Poisonium Z if you want to get silly. Iron Head, several fire moves, Gyro Ball, and of course the always fun Outrage and Draco Meteor. I think that there's a team style he could definitely be used on, at least in lower tiers, but we just have yet to find it. And personally, I kinda wanna try him out myself at some point. I just hope one day he can get out of the shadow of the other Ultra Beasts. And that's it. That's who I deem to be the top 10 most underrated Dark-type Pokemon. What do you think? Do you agree? Or do you disagree and have a list of your own to tell me about? I'm curious as to hear your opinions. Let me know in the comments below. Also, one more time, the comment with the most upvotes will be the typing that we pick next. So be sure to comment down below what typing you guys would like to see next. We're finally here in 2023, and I'm super excited for what this year has to offer us. There's potential DLC for Scarlet and Violet on the horizon, and who knows just what else Game Freak may have up their sleeves. It's gonna be really exciting times coming up for a Pokemon fan. If you're interested in more Mystic content, check out my TikTok and Mystic Umbreon Shorts YouTube channel. I've got a really fun series starting up there very soon, and of course, have a weekly edition of my Should You Use series focusing on Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet. Also, if you're into fanfictions and what-ifs, check out Mystic Reads. I offer a ton of creative spoken word content on there, so come join me. Thanks again for joining me today, and I'll see you all next time.